or ideas, what you consume influences who you become. On the Mind and Matter podcast, we learn together from the best scientists and thinkers alive today about how your mind-body reacts to what you feed it. Before starting Mind and Matter, I spent 10 years in academia doing scientific research. I got a PhD in neuroscience where I focused on neuroendocrinology and the neurobiology of behavior, and before that, I specialized in molecular, developmental, and evolutionary genetics. I use my scientific background to help parse and translate the information that guests share on the podcast. In addition to the podcast, I write long-form written content inspired by the show where I integrate what I've learned across episodes. I also have a free weekly newsletter where I provide you with upcoming guests, share links, and provide commentary on scientific studies and research that I'm reading, and more. Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content. This episode is ad-free, and I rely on my audience to support my efforts. If you're getting value from this content, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Mind and Matter Substack. For just $5 a month, you'll get early access to episodes and other content, full episode transcripts, and I'll prioritize answering your questions in emails and the comments sections. You can also support me by checking out the links in the episode description to my affiliate partners who make various health and wellness products that I use and enjoy myself. You'll receive a discount and help support the podcast that way. And if you want the benefits of a paid subscription, but it's not in your budget, simply sign up for my free weekly newsletter, send me an email, and I'll give you a complimentary paid subscription. Word of mouth is the best way to help the podcast grow. So if you like what I'm doing, please share your favorite episodes with family and friends. The purpose of the podcast is to provide you with information obtained largely from primary sources, the people doing the research and producing new knowledge. This content is never meant to serve as medical advice. And with that, enjoy the episode.
I'm a psychiatrist based in Massachusetts. I've been practicing psychiatry for 25 years. And for the first 10 years of my practice, I practiced conventional psychiatry, medications, and psychotherapy, and then gradually incorporated more and more nutrition principles into my practice. And now, for many years now, the cornerstone of my work has been metabolic and nutritional psychiatry, centering primarily around ketogenic diets, but other types of dietary strategies as well to help people address the root causes of mental health conditions and help them use less medication, sometimes even avoid medications entirely. So that's been my passion for the past 15 years.
I want to start off by just talking about neurons and energy and get people thinking about how the brain uses the food that we consume for energy. So in relatively basic terms, how do our neurons, how do the cells in our brain actually utilize energy? What are the energy sources they can use, and how do they actually use it?
Yeah, so the brain is I call it an energy hog. It needs lots and lots of energy because it's the way that it works is it needs to generate electricity. And so in order to generate electricity, you need a lot of energy. And so the brain is designed to burn, ideally, small molecules. And its two favorite molecules to burn are glucose, which comes from blood sugar. Glucose is the sugar that's circulating in our blood, simple sugar molecule. And ketones, which are a small fragment of fat. So if you're burning fat, you can generate ketones. If you're burning carbohydrate, you can generate glucose. And so these very small molecules, they cross into the brain, and brain cells can use them for energy. And they do many things with that energy, but one of the most important things they do with that energy is generate electricity. So if the energy supply to the brain isn't reliable and smooth, then you can see all kinds of things go wrong with the brain. The brain can lose its balance in terms of its ability to produce smooth energy supply, and you can see destabilization. You can see mood instability. You can see energy levels that are too high, too low, unpredictable, and you can gradually, over time, the brain can lose even cells, and some of the cells can begin to die if there isn't enough energy available. So energy is really key to the smooth, reliable operation of the brain.
Okay, so the brain uses a lot of energy in large part to generate electricity, so the neurons can send the electrochemical signals that they actually send to each other. It sort of makes intuitive sense. There's a lot of electricity going on up there, and so you need a lot of energy to fuel that. There's lots of proteins that facilitate that pump the ions and stuff in and out of the cell. And then, of course, the chemical messengers themselves, things like neurotransmitters, they need to be made, they need to be stored, they need to do what they do. How does the diet connect to things like the neurotransmitters that our brains are actually using as messengers? Are they made out of components of the diet? What is the connection there?
So everything in the brain comes from the food we eat. There wouldn't be anywhere else for it to come from. And I think sometimes people don't think enough about that. Is that, I was trained obviously in medical school and in psychiatry residency to treat so-called chemical imbalances with medications to try to improve people's brain chemistry with medications. And medications do have an effect on brain chemistry. But one of the things I like to help people appreciate the relationship here is between the food and the brain, because really the most powerful way to change your brain chemistry is through food, because that's where brain chemicals and every other component of the brain comes from. So yes, you're right. So of course, that every piece of the brain comes from food. And just like every other organ in the body, in order to construct those pieces, you need the right components. You need proteins, you need the correct mixture of amino acids that come from protein. You need the right types of fats. Some of those come from the diet, some of those we can make ourselves. And you need vitamins and minerals. You need micronutrients in order to help assemble those components and to help run the chemical reactions that turn energy molecules like glucose and ketones into energy. So that's why we eat. I mean, we eat food in order to supply our brains and the rest of our bodies with the pieces, the components, the parts, and the energy that we need to maintain ourselves. So yes, everything comes from food.
And a lot of the neurotransmitters and things in the brain that the brain uses for communication purposes, these are essentially made from things like amino acids, right?
Yes, so most neurotransmitters do ultimately come from amino acids which come from protein. And some of those amino acids we can make ourselves and others we can't. Others we have to get from the diet. So, for example, the amino acid tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid that we must get from the diet because we can't make it ourselves. That amino acid is used, for example, to make neurotransmitter called dopamine. And of course, I'm explaining, I know that you are a neuroscientist, so you don't need to know this, but I am just explaining this for your listeners and viewers who might not be familiar with that. So oftentimes you can use tryptophan, for example, to make serotonin and melatonin, which is our sleep, our circadian rhythm hormone. So you can use tryptophan to make a variety of different neurotransmitters. And if you don't have enough tryptophan, then you won't be able to make enough of those neurotransmitters. And those neurotransmitters are the same neurotransmitters that many of the psychiatric medications are designed to try to support the activity and levels of in the brain.
I see. So something like serotonin is made from the amino acid tryptophan, as are other things in the brain. Melatonin's an example. Some psychiatric medications, so like SSRIs for depression, boost serotonin levels. They're serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So in essence, you can at least directionally do similar things with food through altering the diet that you could do with a psych med. That's basically what you're saying.
I don't know if I'd put it quite that way. Yes, so the way, for example, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor works, like Prozac or Zoloft or Paxil, Celexa, those medications, like you said, they're reuptake inhibitors. So they basically slow down the recycling of those neurotransmitters, so they stay in between the cells longer and the synapses longer, so they can perhaps work a little better. Mm-hmm. And the food can't really do that. But if you're eating in the wrong way, you can destabilize that system. So if you're not getting enough of the amino acids, you may not have enough tryptophan to make those neurotransmitters. But also, if you're eating the wrong way, you can throw that pathway that regulates the production of those different neurotransmitters out of balance. So if you're eating properly, all of this should work without you having to think about it. Mm-hmm. If you're eating the wrong way, you can really run into a lot of trouble pretty quickly. And you might be told that you need medication to help rebalance the system. But like I said, I was trained that the biological root causes of most mental health conditions were chemical imbalances and things like neurotransmitters, but we never stopped to think or talk about, well, what's causing those imbalances in the first place?
Mhm.
And in eating the wrong way has a profound effect on the regulation of those systems.
So, in principle, you could be deficient in something like tryptophan. It's an essential amino acid. We can only get it by eating it in our food. And because it's the precursor to things like serotonin, you can throw off sort of the balance of serotonin by being deficient in tryptophan. How common is that? Are there very many people walking around that aren't getting enough tryptophan or something else?
Not in the developed world, typically. I mean, most people in the developed world are getting enough protein, and some people aren't getting quite enough, or they're not getting quite the right mixture or the ideal mixture of amino acids. But most people, fortunately, at least, and some of us are very lucky to live in parts of the world where we have access to enough high quality protein. That's not true in great parts of the world where malnourishment and access to, especially to animal foods, is very, very limited. And that can cause a great deal of a lot of mental and physical health problems, of course. So, but yes, in the developed world, we don't typically see a lot of protein malnutrition the way you would see in places which are far less fortunate.
Hmm. So there's something kind of interesting there because you said that in many places in some places in the world that are less developed and malnutrition is a much bigger problem, they can be amino acid deficient, and that's often because they lack animal sources of protein. That's not a problem that we have here in the United States. We have plentiful food around, and yet I'm often hearing people say, "Well, I should be getting most of my protein from plants." So what's going on there?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because that is the prevailing and increasingly the popular view and the prevailing sort of official information, the guidelines that we're getting both from our governmental guidelines, but also from prestigious institutions like the Harvard School of Public Health or Tufts University and other prestigious and the World Health Organization, the USDA dietary guidelines. So more and more the message that people are getting is that plant proteins are superior, healthier. Plant foods in general, the more plants you eat, the healthier you are. The fewer animal foods you eat, the healthier you will be. And so essentially plants good, animals risky, or perhaps even dangerous. The truth about the biology of the differences between plant and animal foods and what human biology requires is almost exactly the opposite of that message. And so it's very concerning to me that this message is being absorbed by people and really taken to heart. I mean, people really feel strongly about. I mean, a lot of people want to be healthy, and so they're following this information and they're taking it to heart, and they're changing their diets and they're eating fewer and fewer animal foods and more plant foods. And this is not the way our biology functions at its best. Plant proteins, with few exceptions, there are a few exceptions, do not contain enough of the right mixture of essential amino acids to meet our needs. Whereas every animal food contains enough of the right types of essential amino acids to meet our needs without our even having to think about it.
Mhm. Is a simple way for people to think about this, perhaps that so obviously our body's made out of proteins. The proteins are made out of amino acids. The amino acids aren't all present in equal amounts. There's a particular distribution that our muscles have and our brains have, et cetera, et cetera. So when we think about something like red meat, like beef, should people just think of that as like, okay, we're eating the muscle of a mammal. We're a mammal and we've got muscles. So you're going to naturally have a lot of the same amino acids distributed in that food source that are in our bodies. And it's going to be much closer to the distribution of our bodies than something like, I don't know, what you would find in lentils or something.
That's exactly right. And so, we are animals. We are actually we are actually made of red meat and saturated fat and cholesterol. And yet we're told that those are the very things that are dangerous for us. And plants, most plants are much lower in saturated fat. Most plants lack the amino acids that we need in the right mixtures. And most plants contain different types of fats than the ones that are ideal for the ones that are essential to our brains and bodies optimal functioning. So plants they're not well suited. They're not ideally suited to be the foundation of the human diet. It's not that they're all dangerous or that everybody needs to stop eating them, but really we must, if we're looking for optimal health, meaning nourishing every cell in our bodies optimally with all of the essential nutrients in the right proportions, the most safe and reliable and complete way to do that is with animal foods and not plant foods. Animal foods, we are animals, so we have a lot more in common with them. And the molecules that they contain are the ones that we need.
Hmm.
And they're more bioavailable, they're more plentiful, they're much easier to find. And they do not come with rare exceptions, they do not come with any anti-nutrients to interfere with our ability to absorb them. And they do not come with any, again, with rare exceptions, with any toxins that pose risks to our health when we eat them.
Hmm.
This is not the case with plant foods. Plant foods protect themselves with chemical weapons, and these do pose risks to human health. And they also guard their nutrients with anti-nutrients that make it, in many cases, more difficult for us to access their nutrients. So just because a plant food may contain a nutrient, so if you're reading a label, you may see that the plant food contains something, doesn't necessarily mean that you have good access to it. And I
Mhm.
think that's a little known nutrition secret.
So if let's give people like an example or two here. So, if you're eating grass-fed beef and it's got 20 grams of protein in it, and then you're eating, say, lentils or beans, it's got 20 grams of protein in it. They both say they have 20 grams of protein on it. They both actually contain 20 grams of protein, but what's the difference there? You're going to absorb different amounts of that for different reasons?
Yes, so plant proteins, so the plant foods that are highest in protein are the nuts and legumes. Legumes being, beans and peas and lentils, and soy, things like that. So when people are trying to meet their daily protein requirements through plant foods alone on a vegan diet, they really need to include legumes and nuts in their diet because that's where most of the protein in plants is. So the problem is that it's not protein that we're after. As you said before, it's amino acids. It's this particular mix of amino acids. So all proteins are not created equal. And most people who are following a vegan diet already understand that and know that they need to be careful about how they plan their diet so they don't fall short in any of these amino acids. But then on top of that extra hurdle that you have to go to deal with in order to nourish your brain properly, you also have to deal with these anti-nutrients and toxins that stand in the way of you safely and reliably absorbing all of those amino acids. So all of the seed foods, including legumes and nuts, these foods contain protease inhibitors
Hmm.
that are really they make it more difficult for our digestive enzymes to break those proteins down into their individual amino acids so that we can absorb them.
Hmm.
And those protease inhibitors are there because the plant, quite selfishly and rightfully, wants to hold on to those amino acids for its own selfish purposes. Meaning, if you're a soybean, what you exist in order to nourish an embryo, there's an inside every
Yeah,
bean, there's a little embryo,
it's a
and
baby.
it's going to sprout. It's a bait. And so it needs those nutrients, including those
Hmm.
amino acids. It certainly doesn't want
Yeah,
you getting your grubby paws on
yeah.
them.
They don't want to be eaten, just like an animal doesn't want to be eaten. The difference is that an animal can run away or has spines or has some other way to protect itself. The plant can't go anywhere, and so it
Right.
has to use chemistry.
That's right. And it's very clever chemistry, evolved over hundreds of millions of years. Really smart.
What would be like one or two examples of common plant toxins that are coming in, a normal everyday other plant food that we would otherwise consider to be healthy?
Yeah, so there are toxins and there are anti-nutrients. So in terms of toxins, one of the food groups that I suggest that people who are struggling with mental health conditions uh, avoid are the nightshades. And the nightshades are things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, all of the red spices, some paprika, chili peppers, things like that, and white potatoes, the skins of white potatoes and goji berries. So
Hmm.
these are the nightshades, and they might sound like they have nothing in common, but if you look at the fruit of any of those plants, they all have kind of a little green elfish hat. If you picture an eggplant, it's got that little hat. So
Mm.
tomatoes do too, right? And they're in the same family. And so they protect themselves with chemical weapons. And one of the chemical weapons they protect themselves, one type is called a glycoalkaloid. And these are neurotoxic. So these are toxic to the nervous system. And so if you absorb them to any significant extent, which you can, then that can irritate the nervous system. So this is just one example of a chemical that's naturally occurring in plants, and we're told that all plants are equally healthy and that the more we eat of them, the better, and that we need a wide variety. We have to eat the rainbow. We need a We're never taught to think about each different type of plant food as unique. Some are riskier and healthier than others. And I
Mhm.
think it makes sense to really give them their due. You don't lump them all together in one category. They're very different types of foods that have different vitamins, different minerals, different chemicals in them, different risks and benefits. They're not all the same, and they're not all necessarily good for you.
Mhm. And so on the anti-nutrient piece, so these are things that sort of prevent the absorption of the nutrients that are otherwise in these things. Is that why, like I've seen a lot of data out there around certain micronutrients and their bioavailability across animal and plant foods, everything from calcium to other vitamins and stuff. Is that why you often see with plant foods that although it might contain X number of milligrams of this, that, or the other vitamin, you often don't absorb very much of that?
Yeah, so a really good example is phytic acid or phytate. And this is widespread in plants, but it's especially, you especially find large quantities of it. And again, the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, which are all essentially seeds that contain embryos. Those are the most heavily defended parts of plants, is of course where the embryo is housed. You're protecting the future generation of that species, right?
Mhm.
So grains, beans, nuts, and seeds all are rich in phytic acid, and phytic acid is a mineral magnet, a very powerful one. And it's
Mm.
there to hold on to. When you think about it, a seed, what does a seed need to deal with? A seed might need to sit for days, months or years waiting for the conditions to be right to sprout.
Yep.
And while it's sitting there, it's dealing with the environment. It's dealing with little creatures that are coming up to, gnaw on it. And how is it going to survive? So it needs to protect itself with toxins, but also with anti-nutrients. Phytic acid is there to guard, to hold on to calcium, magnesium, iron, and zinc for the future sprouting plant that hopes to become a larger plant. And it may need to hold on to those minerals for a very long time. So when we consume, one of the examples I give in the book, and that I give in a lot of my presentations because it's just such an excellent example, easy to understand for people who, if this is a new idea for them, is zinc. So zinc, the food on the whole food on the planet that is richest in zinc is the oyster. So
Mm.
if you eat oysters, there was an experiment done a long time ago that shows this. If you eat oysters, you see your blood level of oyster rise very nicely, and that is a sign that you've effectively absorbed a great deal of zinc from that oyster. If you eat that same amount of oysters with black beans, which is a seed food or a legume, you absorb less than half of the
Hmm.
zinc from those
Ah,
oysters.
so it's not just eating the plant. It's not just plants are difficult for us to extract those minerals from. The anti-nutrients can actually affect the absorption of animal foods that we eat together with the plant foods.
Yes, and this can happen with iron, zinc, calcium, magnesium. It's a very, very common phenomenon in among plant foods. And so if you eat that same amount of oysters with corn tortillas, again, corn is a grain, so it's a seed, you absorb virtually none of the zinc from those oysters. It's a very powerful effect. It's not subtle at all.
Hmm.
And we often wonder, why in wealthy countries that have access to all kinds of foods, do we have so much, for example, iron deficiency?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, even people who are eating animal foods along with the other foods, and that's because we're not given the right information about what are the best food, where are the foods that contain the best and most bioavailable iron,
Hmm.
which are the meat, seafood, and poultry, and which are the foods that are working against our ability to
Hmm.
absorb iron. And those are the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds, and the certain types of vegetables as well, and even green tea and other types of things. We are told to base our diets on grains, beans, nuts, and seeds.
Hmm.
And these are very low in nutrients, especially the grains and the beans, and very high in anti-nutrients. So they really have not earned their place at the base of the pyramid.
Well, I mean, speaking of the pyramid, yeah, I mean, people have talked ad nauseum about the food pyramid and where it comes from and everything. What you're telling us is really important. It's really interesting, but it's also not new, right? We've known about anti-nutrients for a long time. We've known basically all of the things that you just told us. That
Right.
this has been out there for a long time if you know how to look for it. Why then is the narrative, the official narrative, the official food guidelines, and what I hear from most physicians that I talk to in my personal life, why is everything plant-based, grain-based? Where is this coming from if it's in conflict with what we know about the biology?
It's such a good question because it really is a cold hard fact. These are cold hard facts. These are not disputed. I don't know anybody who would look at this science and say, "Well, that's not true." The problem, I think, with it's complicated, and I write a lot about it in the book. Like, why is it that we have this plant biased mindset where we give plants much more credit than they deserve from a nutritional and health standpoint, and we demonize animal foods, which are really the healthiest, safest, and most nutritious foods that we can eat. And so why have we done that? And a lot the roots of this anti-meat sentiment, they have their roots in certain religious traditions that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. But the argument was often, spiritual and having to do with differences between humans and other animals, and perhaps even our compassion or our ability to identify with species that are similar to us. So,
Mhm.
especially mammals, right? So, we are mammals. You can make eye contact with a mammal. You can have relationships with mammals, right? In the way that you can't really with, I don't know, a
Mhm.
clam or an
Yeah,
egg,
yeah.
you know.
No,
So
yeah. I mean,
I think
I
some
get
of that's
that. I get that. What I don't, so I mean, obviously that's out there. A lot of people go to veganism or plant-based diets out of from an animal cruelty and welfare standpoint.
yes,
I
yes.
totally get that. I That's obviously out there, but like I've spoken to many physicians and they promote these plant-based diets because that's what it's from a very physician oriented, health oriented mindset. That they say it will be better for me.
Right.
Where is that coming from?
So yeah, so the early part of the story has to do with spirituality and religion and culture and sort of human animal connection, right? But it morphed in the 1800s. It became a health argument. There's information about the history of that in the book, but it morphed into a health argument. There's a particular church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and other branches of churches similar, that realized that this argument, this compassionate argument and spiritual argument, was not swaying enough people. And
Hmm.
so they needed to appeal to people's fears. And so it began this narrative grew in the 1800s and has only grown since then, that it's not just that, it may not be kind, or it may not be spiritually, it may not be a good person if you eat animals, but also that it may be dangerous to your health. And that argument's very powerful. And because people care about their own health, and they and so these arguments grew and grew, and then scientists picked up on these arguments and took some of them face value, and ever since have really been conducting study after study after study, trying to understand why plant foods are better for us and why animal foods are bad for us, without ever questioning the original premise, a lot of these studies are designed to try to find the good in plants and try
Hmm.
to find evil in animal foods. And I challenge anybody listening to find me a study that conclusively shows that this is the case. And the more studies that are produced, the more studies, the more the more. So what's happening is doctors learn nothing about nutrition. So in 4 years of medical school, we've had 2 or 3 hours of nutrition education, and most of it was incorrect. And 4 years of psychiatry residency training, we didn't talk about food once. Doctors know nothing about nutrition. So the last person, well, you should go to is a conventionally trained physician for your nutrition advice, because they're going to read the guidelines, they're going to read the recommendations without actually looking at the primary research articles that are generating those headlines and those guidelines.
Hmm.
And the problem with plant-based diet science is that there are lots and lots of studies that claim
Hmm.
that plant-based diets are healthier, but none of them are conducted in a way that can actually show that to be the
Hmm.
case.
Yeah, you did a really good job in the book in the beginning of mapping out for people the different types of studies that are out there and what they do or do not show us. And one that I just want to spend a little bit of time on is the field of nutritional epidemiology.
Yes.
So, most of the time, I think it's fair to say that I'll just say much of the time, very, very much of the time, when people see a headline in the news written by a journalist, such and such diet is associated with blah, blah, good thing or bad thing. Oftentimes, those are coming from epidemiological studies. What are those studies, and why is this such a tricky area?
Really, this field of nutrition epidemiology, which I'll explain in a second, there's a whole chapter about in the book. This is the information or the pseudo information that comes out of nutrition epidemiology is largely responsible for the public health crisis we find ourselves in today, because nutrition epidemiology is a wholly unscientific method of generating information. So what I mean by that really is kind of a simple example. And there's hundreds and hundreds of studies like this, where let's say that you're a nutrition epidemiologist and you are interested in the relationship between a particular food and a particular disease. Let's say that you believe that you're worried that red meat might cause heart disease. Well, it's a pretty hard thing to show that. And really, nutrition experiments are hard to design and conduct, and they're expensive. You can't control what everybody eats. You can't track what everybody eats. And you certainly can't do it over long periods of time with lots and lots of people. It's virtually impossible to do that. So instead, what we do is nutrition epidemiologists give out these surveys. They give these very limited, they're called food frequency questionnaires, and they ask people a few questions, at most maybe 130 questions, about what they remember eating over the past year and how much. So, for example, a question might be, how many half-cup servings of blueberries have you eaten on average over the past year? And
So not only do you have to have been eating blueberries half a cup at a time and measuring it, you have to have perfect memory recall for months or years in your past. And this is what like many of these studies are based on, that quality of data, literally.
all nutrition epidemiology studies are based on food frequency questionnaires, and there's no measurement or tracking or recording of food at all, except for sometimes they'll say, well, we'll actually measure what you ate over the past 3 days. But most of these studies go on for years and years, and there's no measurement, recording, or tracking of what people are actually eating over
Mm-hmm.
that period of time.
Yeah.
There's no data. They're just wild guesses.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you could argue that this isn't particularly useful data. Could you also argue that this is actually worse than useful? It's actually counterproductive because we start thinking and believing things that aren't actually true. We think we have real knowledge when we, in fact, don't.
So yes, I agree with that 100%. You're absolutely right. Science requires two things, the scientific method. There are lots of different types of studies, but they all, if it's going to be science, it has to have two components. It has to have, you have to observe something in the world and that you get curious about. You say, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why that is. And you come up with your hypothesis. You have an observation and a hypothesis. I wonder if red meat causes heart disease, right? And so, and then the second step is supposed to be that you test your hypothesis, you test your theory in an experiment to see if your theory is correct. If now nutrition epidemiologists spend 100% of their time in step one, and they never venture into step two. They never test. They never do experiments. They don't gather data in step one, so that's already a problem. But even if this were real data that we could rely on, they never test their theories to see if they're correct. If you never test your theory, you can be wrong for decades and never have to face that and never have to correct course. And this is exactly what's been happening in nutrition epidemiology, is that none of these so-called scientists have tested their theories themselves to find out whether or not they're true, so they can continue believing the wrong things about nutrition and human biology and health, and continue disseminating their theories. These theories get rolled into guidelines and into nutrition headlines all the time as if they are facts, when all they are is untested theories based on wild guesses.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of decades of time that can elapse, where people think one thing, but that's not necessarily the case. I want to talk to you about cholesterol.
Sure.
For all of my life, I mean, even to this day, other than what I independently know, if I was just listening to my teachers and my doctors growing up, cholesterol is bad. You don't want your cholesterol to be too high. You don't want to eat too much cholesterol. That is the folklore that I've been taught. Most people have been taught their entire lives. Where does that idea come from? And what is cholesterol doing in our brains in particular?
So cholesterol is a perfect example of a really vital molecule that every cell in the human body requires in order to function, develop properly, that has been demonized because it is only found in animal foods. And so what happens in the plant versus animal debate is that essential and vital molecules that we literally cannot live without are because they don't exist in plants. Plants don't need them. Plants have a different type of cholesterol that they do need cholesterol, but a totally different kind. If you're trying to place the blame for human health problems on animal foods, you need to point the finger at specific molecules in those animal foods that don't exist in plants. And cholesterol is a perfect example of this because the type of cholesterol is different. So you can say, oh, well, let's see, we think animal foods must be bad. We've heard that they're bad for us.
You start from the premise animal is bad, therefore you look for something in animals but not in plants.
Right. So cholesterol is a critical molecule in every cell membrane, and it's not just a structural component. It's also used to build other kinds of really important molecules in the body. Structural integrity. It's also important for certain parts of brain cell, certain thickened or stiffened areas of certain cells. Area of a cell called a lipid raft, which guides nerve cells to their destinations when the brain is developing. Cholesterol does many, many important things. So, and it's so important that almost every cell in the body is capable of making it itself. So if you don't eat any cholesterol, never fear, you will still make plenty of cholesterol. Your body will still be full of cholesterol. Your blood cholesterol can even be too high if you never eat a molecule of cholesterol or you never touch an animal food in your entire life, because so important, we make it ourselves. So, and the brain is especially interesting in this regard because the brain is particularly rich in cholesterol. It's one of the most cholesterol-rich organs in the whole body. So, and not a single molecule of the cholesterol inside your brain comes from your bloodstream or the food you eat. Every molecule of that, because cholesterol is too big and bulky to cross from the bloodstream across the blood-brain barrier and into the brain. Yes, the
So you
brain needs
can't,
it so much, it makes every single molecule itself on site from scratch.
and why is it making it? What does it actually get used for by the neurons?
Every cell membrane, so every cell in our bodies has a membrane. And so every cell membrane requires cholesterol for structural integrity and for developmental function and many other purposes as well. You also need cholesterol to build hormones and other types of, and certain molecules that are important for the mitochondria to generate energy. So you need cholesterol as a fundamental building block of membranes, hormones, and certain other components. So you must have it. And if your cells don't contain cholesterol, they will fall apart.
Hmm.
So this is not optional.
Hmm.
And the brain is full of it is the reason why the brain has more cholesterol than any other organ in the body is because it's full of membranes.
Hmm.
And the myelin is just very tightly wound membranes wrapping around and circulating insulating the circuitry in our brain. You certainly don't want to skimp on myelin.
Hmm. So cholesterol is it's a component of cell membranes in all of our cells. So it's an important structural integrity molecule. It's also used as a precursor for various hormones, which coordinate very important biological changes throughout the body.
Yeah.
Um, but I've been told my whole life cholesterol equals heart disease. High cholesterol is always bad. If I eat cholesterol, isn't it just going into my blood and then clogging my arteries?
Yeah, so that is what we've been led to believe, and still most people, even to this day, believe that even though uh, major organizations, including the American Heart Association and the USDA, have taken back that warning many years ago, that the dietary guidelines essentially back in 2015 said dietary cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern. So essentially, you can't overconsume it, and the reason why is, our bodies aren't just empty buckets that you pour cholesterol into until it spills over. We regulate how much cholesterol we absorb from our food. If we're not getting enough, we make enough. We make up the rest. If we are getting enough from food, then we make less. And so we absorb only what we need. And so there's that myth is easy to dispel. But heart disease is fascinating because yes, you will find cholesterol inside the plaques of people who have had heart attacks, but that doesn't mean that the cholesterol caused that heart attack. Heart disease, first and foremost, is an inflammatory disease where there's been damage to the lining of the blood vessels, and otherwise the cholesterol couldn't worm its way in. So all heart disease begins with damage to the endothelium, or that first layer of that lining of cells that separates the bloodstream from the interior of the wall of the artery. So damage and inflammation happen first. Cholesterol ends up there for lots of different reasons, but it is not the culprit.
Mhm. Speaking of inflammation, so I want to talk about fatty acids, the different types of dietary fats. So you got saturated fats, mono and polyunsaturated fats of different kinds. Let's start with saturated fat because it sort of goes with cholesterol in the sense that I've been told my entire life, don't eat too much saturated fat, don't eat too much cholesterol. Those two have sort of gone together in many people's minds. Even to this day, they're synonymous with heart disease. What's going on with saturated fat? How much is too much? What is the basic biology there?
Yeah, so two important things to say to that. So one is that this is another great example of trying to find a difference between plant and animal foods, and then hanging the blame, placing the blame of the theoretically dangerousness, the theoretic dangerousness of animal foods on a molecule that's easier to find in animal foods than plant foods. Plant foods do contain all foods, all plants and animals. Foods are plants and animals. All plants and animals contain a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fat, just different ratios, right? And in fact, the only animal foods that contain more saturated fat than unsaturated fat are dairy products. If you're looking at beef or pork or chicken, you will not find an animal food except for dairy that is higher in saturated fat than unsaturated fat.
Hmm. So if
Dairy
I'm eating
is
a steak with some fat on it, it's actually got quite a bit of monounsaturated fat in it. Not that much different or sort of, directionally similar to something like olive oil? Can I think of it almost like that?
Yeah, so olive oil is mostly monounsaturated fat, but it's got polyunsaturated fat and it even has some saturated fat. All fats are mixtures.
Mhm.
And I think that the one of the big differences between plant and animal foods is that most plants are very low in all kinds of fat because plants store their energy as starch, lumps
Mm.
of starch, typically underground, like a potato or a tuber or a root. We cannot afford to do that because if we did that, we'd have to be dragging big lumps of starch around with us wherever we go.
Yeah.
Very inconvenient. At the airport, you have to pay extra, and so, we on purpose store energy as saturated fat. Saturated fat is light, it's compact, it's flexible. You can store lots and lots of energy in a small amount of space because we need to move around in the world. We can't afford to be tied down to the ground by big lumps of starch.
Hmm.
And so and we make that saturated fat on purpose in our bodies, even if you don't eat any fat at all. If you eat more carbohydrate than you need at any given moment, you will turn every extra molecule of that carbohydrate into saturated fat on purpose because that's how the body prefers to store it. So, how could it possibly be bad for you?
So if plants like to store their energy as glycogen, as starch, a form of carbohydrate, why do I see so many bottles of vegetable oils? Where are all these vegetable fats coming from?
Ah, yes. So I'm glad you brought this up. So yeah, so there are some plant foods that are a little higher in fat. And so if you're looking for protein in plants, you usually look to the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. If you're looking for fat, you look especially to the nuts and the seeds. And there are certain fatty fruits, avocados, olives, and coconuts, and palm fruit. These are fatty, fleshy fruits. We're not talking about the seed of the avocado. The pit, of course, has some fat. All pits and seeds have fat. But the actual flesh of the fruit, the avocado itself, and when you throw the pit away, there's quite a bit of fat in the avocado. Most fruits are not like that, but the avocado and the olive and the palm fruit are exceptions to that. Most plants are very low in fat. So if you're trying to, if you think, oh my gosh, well, it's not safe for us to cook with animal fats because animal fats are dangerous. What do we want to use to cook with? What do we want to use to add to our pies and muffins? How are we going to fry things? How are we going to saute things? What are we going to do? Um, uh, well, we're going to have to go to the plant foods, the seeds, where there is definitely more fat in the seeds than most other parts of the plant. We're going to have to extract that and concentrate that fat and put it in bottles and cans and things like that so that we can get, because otherwise it's pretty hard to get much fat out of plants. So, in order to do this, it's actually very difficult to wrangle fat out of a seed. If you try to do this at home, good luck trying to make a bottle of oil out of a pile of seeds. It's very difficult. You need a factory. You need 15 chemical steps and you need an explosive solvent called hexane and to remove all the odor, all the toxins, and all the flavor from those seeds and concentrate that oil into a bottle that's odorless, tasteless, shelf stable, plant-based, heart healthy, cholesterol-free cooking oil, which is really just an industrial waste product of originally from the agricultural industry.
And what do these vegetable oils, what do these seed oils have to do with inflammation?
Yeah, so the actual if you're eating whole foods, so if your diet naturally can if you're hunter-gatherer, thousands of years ago, you would have of course eaten some nuts and seeds as part of your diet. And that would have included some fat, including so unsaturated fats and saturated fats and all the different types of fats would be in there. One of the fats that would be in there is called linoleic acid. It's a polyunsaturated omega-6 fatty acid, very long chain, very fragile. But yes, it would have some of that linoleic acid in there. But it would be awfully hard to consume a large amount of it because you'd have to eat an awful lot of seeds to get a significant quantity of it. So our diet naturally used to contain maybe 2 to 4% of this linoleic acid. But when you extract that fat from those seeds in an industrial factory, and you concentrate that fat into a bottle, then you've got a bottle. That bottle could be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80% linoleic acid in that
Hmm.
bottle.
What would
And
common examples of very high linoleic acid oils be?
grapeseed oil is the highest in linoleic acid. And so sunflower oil, safflower oil, corn oil, all of these are very high in linoleic acid. There's a chart in the book where you can look up your favorite fat and see where it falls. The animal fats are lowest in linoleic acid, and there are a few plant fats which are naturally low in linoleic acid, and these are, for example, olive oil and coconut oil.
Hmm.
Coconut oil is famously very high in saturated fat.
Hmm. What happens? So we have these vegetable oils that are high in linoleic acid. They're mass produced. They're highly concentrated in these seed oils, linoleic acid being perhaps the most common one. We often cook with them. We fry with them. We put them in a pan, et cetera, et cetera. What happens when you heat these things up and then consume them?
Ugh. Well, they're very fragile. So any long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, saturated fats are very stable. They're solid at room temperature. They're stable. They're chemically stable. They don't break down or go rancid easily. Whereas unsaturated fats, and these include monounsaturated fats like olive oil, but also especially the polyunsaturated fats in vegetable oils. These you just look at them the wrong way and they fall apart. They're really very susceptible to what's called oxidative stress when they're exposed to the air or to heat or to the oxidative stress that naturally occurs inside the cells of our body as part of our daily operations. They break down, and they can also in the process of breaking down, they can instigate this chain reaction of oxidative stress where all of these reactive byproducts these toxic byproducts can form from that chain reaction. These are called oxlams, which some people think can be quite damaging to the body. So the problem with when it comes to linoleic acid in the brain. So let's say, so when you cook it, it's going to fall apart easily into these toxic byproducts. If you let it sit on the counter too long, or if you eat too much of it, and your natural chemical processes will cause this to occur. When you eat vegetable oil, which all of us do all the time, even I do, no matter how hard I try, it's everywhere, right? Every restaurant uses it, every salad dressing, every soup, every baked good, everything is cooked in vegetable oil now. It's cheap and we're told that it's good for us. So we're all taking in lots and lots of this. The brain absorbs that linoleic acid, and instead of doing something constructive and useful and healthy with it, the vast majority of the linoleic acid that the brain absorbs, it burns for energy.
Hmm.
And this is not good. The brain it's not safe for the brain to burn long molecules for energy because when it does that, it generates a lot more of this something called oxidative stress.
Hmm.
That's why the brain is very susceptible to oxidative stress. It doesn't have the same antioxidant capacity that the rest of the body does. So it's more sensitive. So that it's designed to build fast burning, short, small molecules
Hmm.
like glucose and ketones, which are
I,
much shorter.
I see. So it can burn linoleic acid. It can burn these longer fatty acids. That
Yes,
produces more oxidative stress than burning smaller molecules like glucose or ketone bodies. So the more you consume these things, the more they're burned in the brain, the more damage that's going to happen over time because that means more oxidative stress.
exactly. Oxidative stress is one of the root causes of mental health and physical health conditions. And one of the reasons why if you change your diet, you can have a huge effect on the amount of oxidative stress that's occurring in your body.
I want to talk a little bit about energy in the brain and the different fuel sources that we use. So you've got glucose, you've got ketone bodies. These are two different fuel sources that neurons can use to power themselves. What is the difference between glucose and ketone bodies, and what are the sort of natural conditions under which the brain would be using one versus the other?
Oh, great. So yes. So the brain, as Professor Stephen Cunnane, who's a brain metabolism and aging expert from the University of Sherbrooke in Canada, decades of experience studying this, he describes the brain as a hybrid engine. It's yes, it can burn. It can function 100% on glucose. It can run 100% on glucose, but it prefers to and works best when it's burning a mixture of glucose and ketones. So and why is that? So and he's shown this, and there have been lovely experiments to show this that that neurons, when they're given plenty of glucose, enough so that they could run 100% of glucose if they wanted to, if you also give them some ketones, they will choose not to run 100% on glucose. They will choose to absorb some ketones. And the more ketones you give them, the more they will absorb and burn. So even though there's plenty of glucose and they could, if they wanted to, run 100% on glucose. So why would a cell choose to burn a mixture rather than pure glucose? We're often told glucose is the best fuel for the brain. It's the
Uh,
ideal
okay,
fuel.
so I'm not sure I was aware of this. So the understanding that I often hear out there, and it sounds like this is incorrect. So this is good to highlight.
Sure.
I've often been told or heard people say really that the brain prefers to burn glucose, and when it runs out, then it will use ketone bodies by burning
Right.
fat to get the ketone bodies. What you're saying is if you give plentiful levels of both glucose and ketone bodies to neurons, they will use a particular mixture of them, and that is presumably the most efficient means by which they create ATP.
Right. I mean, we can't read their little minds, but we can assume, we can guess that they wouldn't do that for no
Mhm.
reason, that they
Mhm.
wouldn't so readily absorb and burn these without good reason. And we do have a good understanding of why they might choose to do that, because glucose, yes, is a wonderful fuel source for the brain and a perfectly good one. And so there's not so it is one of the brain's preferred fuel sources. However. There are advantages that ketones have over glucose. So glucose burns faster than
Mhm.
ketones,
Mhm.
and there are certain rapid fire cells in the brain that work best when they have access to fast energy. So
Mhm.
that's one of the advantages glucose has over ketones. And the other advantage glucose has over ketones is that there are certain construction pathways inside cells called the pentose phosphate pathway for any biochemistry nerds. This pentophosphate which is responsible for building antioxidant molecules and building DNA molecules. That pathway can't use ketones because ketones are too small. So that pathway requires glucose, and then there are these certain rapid fire cells that require glucose. All the rest of the brain's operations do just fine, in fact, better on ketones because they do burn more slowly, but they burn more efficiently, they burn more safely, more
Mhm.
cleanly, with less inflammation and less oxidative stress.
So
So
when you say
that's
efficiently and cleanly, you mean like so for every ketone body that you use, you can get more bang for your buck. Is that what you're saying? That you get more
yes,
ATP
yes,
per molecule, and then you produce also fewer free radicals?
yes, with less oxygen required.
I see.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
see. So how do I ask this question? How easy is it to go into ketosis? Does it seem difficult just because of our modern food environment makes it difficult? Were people going into and out of ketosis more often ancestrally? How do you think about like how often the brain should or how often the brain how has the brain evolved to be flipping and flopping between ketosis and using glucose or using a mix? What's How do you think about that?
Yeah, so oh my gosh. So when the brain is developing in utero, that baby, whether the mother is eating a ketogenic diet or not, she can be eating a very high carbohydrate diet and not being ketosis herself. That growing baby is in ketosis
Hmm.
on purpose because that it's very important for brain development to have ketones be fueling and supplying not just the building blocks but also a clean, reliable source of energy for that process, right? So we know that we are designed even before we're born to naturally be in ketosis, at least some of the time, right? So now we are designed, we evolved to be what's called metabolically flexible. This is really important for the survival of our species. If you're surrounded by lots of potatoes, you better eat those potatoes. If you're surrounded by, a fatty animal, a food, if you're surrounded by eggs, if you're surrounded by, I don't know, a pig, wild boars, you better be able to eat those animals. So we're designed to naturally switch back and forth to make best use of whatever is available to us in our environment. It's not that burning carbohydrates is, inherently dangerous. It's that we are designed to be able to make good use of whatever we have available to us. We should have this metabolic flexibility. So a big difference between, so you asked, so how easy it is to go into ketosis. Babies and children, young people go very easily into ketosis. All they have to do is just not eat for a little while. In fact, a lot of children, just by going to sleep at night and not eating, wake up in the morning, will wake up in the morning in ketosis, even if they were eating a relatively high carbohydrate diet the day before. But we gradually, as we overeat if we're eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often, and we're eating too frequently, so that our insulin levels are never really allowed to come down and stay in the lower range long enough to turn fat burning on so that we can switch into fat burning mode, then we start to lose some of our metabolic flexibility. So most people now are eating carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates like sugars and flours and cereals and fruit juices, things like that, with every meal and snack. So 6 times a day, often, sometimes even more often than that. And when you're eating that way, carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates, demand a lot of insulin to be processed, which fat does not. So when you're eating this in this high insulin way, your insulin levels, and you're getting hungry in between meals because you're eating the wrong way, your insulin levels stay high all day long and well into the night. And it's only towards morning when they start to lower into the fat burning range. But it takes a long time to do that because if you've really loaded up on a lot of carbohydrate, you have to burn a good deal of that off before your fat burning systems will turn on. So most of us are not waking up in ketosis. Most of us are waking up with very low or no ketones detectable on a meter, on a blood meter. And we would have to then fast for many hours that next day to begin to even start to see a little bit of fat burning taking place. We really want to be able to spend at least on a regular basis. I'm not saying that everybody needs to be in ketosis all the time, but if we're not spending at least some regular period of time burning fat, whether you're eating a ketogenic diet or not, if you're not in that low insulin state, burning fat for energy, your body can't switch into this healing, recycling, repairing mode that we all need to spend a decent period of time in order to maintain our health. If you're always eating in this high insulin way, it's like you've got your foot on that gas pedal and all of your cells are going full steam ahead and you're in building and growth and storage mode all the time. You're never in that healing, recycling, repairing mode that we all need in order to maintain our good health.
Well, one thing that's strange here is, you're telling me all this stuff. It makes a lot of sense. You're a psychiatrist. You understand the brain. I'm looking at a post here from the American Diabetes Association, and they say that, quote, the brain needs glucose to function appropriately. So this is confusing. Why would they be saying that?
So they're absolutely right. And so a half-truth is a very powerful problem in the world. It's true, the brain does need some glucose at all times. The brain, as we were saying before, the brain cannot, even though ketones are a wonderful source of fuel and clean and reliable and efficient and all of that, less oxidative stress, all that sort of thing, the brain cannot run 100% on ketones because those fast-acting cells need fast energy, and those construction pathways need glucose molecules. Mm-hmm. But you can get every single molecule of the glucose your brain and the rest of your body needs without eating a single molecule of carbohydrate in the diet.
Huh. So, well, that's funny. Like the second half of the quote there is, so the ADA is saying, so a certain amount of carbohydrates is needed for healthy eating.
So that's the lie. So
Okay.
there's a truth and a lie. The truth
Yep.
is, yes, the brain does need a certain amount of glucose, but that glucose does not need to come from the diet because we can make all of our own glucose inside our bodies smoothly, reliably, efficiently from fat and protein.
Hmm.
And when you do it that way, it's a demand-driven system, so you only make the amount you need. So you
Mm,
don't risk these spikes and crashes that can sometimes happen if you're eat and it's
I
very
see.
commonly happening now if you eat the wrong types of carbohydrate, especially in too large a quantity.
I see. So if you're going into ketosis, either through a ketogenic diet or through fasting, exercise, what have you, your brain will still make the glucose it needs. It has the biological capacity to do that. And doing it that way enables it to just use what it needs without overindulging itself, basically.
Right. And the brain actually doesn't make it. It's the liver that makes it and sends it up to the
Mm,
brain.
okay.
The
Okay.
brain can't be bothered with, that kind of, it's
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
busy
Yeah.
doing other things. But yes, exactly. So your system will make all the glucose you need
Hmm.
and decide exactly where it needs to go and when. It's a very intelligent system.
Hmm.
It is not going to let your brain run low on glucose.
Hmm. So you said when we were deconstructing what the American Diabetes Association said, you said there was a truth and a lie. The word lie there, is it a lie or is it just ignorance? What do you think?
Well, I think that was a poor choice of words because I really don't know what they know or don't know, or I'm
Hmm.
not saying that they're intentionally lying. I mean, when I was using that word because when we said, there's a half truth, that a half truth can be a very powerful thing and a very dangerous thing because yes, there's some truth in that statement, but the other half of it isn't true.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying that they're intentionally lying to people. I'm not saying that at all. I'm
Hmm.
saying half of it isn't true.
Hmm.
And because yes, the brain needs glucose, but no, you do not need dietary carbohydrate. And even the Institute of Medicine back in 2005 put this in writing in their document saying that the absolute requirement for dietary carbohydrate in the human diet compatible with life and health is 0 grams per
Hmm.
day.
Interesting. But I mean, I would imagine that the American Diabetes Association, I mean, one would think that they're composed of people that know a lot about this biology.
I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if most of them didn't know this biology. I mean, I didn't know a lot of this biology until I took the time, and it was years of
Hmm.
independent study to learn this for myself. I didn't learn this in school.
Hmm.
I had to teach myself these things, and I have a lot of colleagues who are in the same boat. This information is not readily available in sort of mainstream educational settings, not even in the best medical schools.
Hmm. So you think that we're sort of supposed to, or we're evolved to be metabolically flexible and sort of be moving into different metabolic regimes. We're not supposed to always be in this high insulin state. Can you say a little bit more about insulin? What is insulin as a hormone? What is it basically telling our bodies to do?
Yeah, so a lot of people think, and this is how I was taught in medical school, a lot of people think of insulin as simply a blood sugar regulator, right? So let's say you have, a piece of cake and your glucose goes up in your bloodstream, you absorb the glucose, you get a glucose spike in the bloodstream, you get an insulin spike right on its tail, and it squirrels that glucose away into cells, end of story. Like that's what's insulin shot. But it is an important role that insulin has, is to manage that incoming glucose, but it's certainly not its most important job. Insulin at heart is a master growth hormone. It's a metabolic orchestrator. It directly and powerfully influences the metabolism of every cell in the body. Every cell in the body and the brain has insulin receptors on their surfaces, so they can pay attention to insulin's signals and telling them what to do with all of that food and energy that you just took in. It's directing, it's telling cells what to do. And so if your insulin levels are running too high too often, which is true now for the vast majority of Americans, between 53 and 93% of us, depending which study you look at, our insulin levels are running too high. And so we're not spending enough time in that healing low insulin mode. When insulin levels run too high, just like any hormone, if you're bombarding your insulin receptors with too much of a hormone, they are going to naturally start to tone down their response to protect themselves from being overstimulated by insulin. And so that's called insulin resistance. And insulin resistance means that the insulin that you're producing isn't working as well as it should.
Hmm.
And that is a root cause. Insulin resistance or high insulin levels. That is a major driving force behind most of the physical and mental health conditions that we fear.
Is it fair to say that the insulin resistance, that when cells are turning down their capacity to be sensitive to insulin, they're actually behaving as they should? Is this like a normal adaptation that would go away in the absence of too much insulin?
Yeah, if too much damage hasn't occurred yet, perhaps, right? So for most people, this has been going on for years and every single day and well into the night for years and years and years and years, sometimes decades. So we don't know to what extent that can be reversed. And so yes, it is a natural, physiological, protective, predicted response to high levels of any hormone. So you can see this with thyroid hormone, you can see this with testosterone, with estrogen,
Mm-hmm.
with really any hormone, with vitamin D. You can
Mm-hmm.
see it with any hormone in the body. If there's too much of it, the body will naturally tone down its response to protect itself.
Hmm.
Homeostasis, keep trying to keep things in balance.
Mm-hmm. And so, what is it about the low insulin metabolic mode that is promoting healing and good things? So what's actually going on there biologically?
One of the things that's going on there is called autophagy. And so when insulin levels are high, so it's this master metabolic hormone, when insulin levels are high, it basically what it's telling cells is build, grow, store. It's basically saying, I'm the hormone of plenty. You've just had a big meal. Let's put these molecules to work. Let's build and grow. And so let's make hay while the sun shines, right? So let's fire up all these processes and get to work. And if there's more energy here than we need, then I want you to take all the extra and I want you to store it as fat. Insulin is a fat storage hormone. And when insulin levels are too high, you literally cannot burn fat. Uh, when insulin levels are low, so when insulin is high, it's hormone of plenty, build, grow, store. When insulin is low, not zero, you only will have zero insulin if you have type 1 diabetes and your pancreas cannot produce any insulin. When insulin goes nice and low, not zero, but low, then that's signaling your cells, okay, we want you to relax and rest and repair and heal. And one of the things we want you to do is we want you to start burning fat for energy because we don't have any more glucose coming in. So let's burn fat instead. We got plenty of fat, most of us. Even if even if you're not overweight, there's always plenty of fat to burn unless you're extremely dangerously underweight. You've got energy to burn, so let's make use of it. And all of these pathways in the cells, which have been quieter because the cells have been busy doing other things, when insulin levels come down, those pathways are turned on, they're switched on. And one of them includes autophagy, which is basically kind of looking around for damaged components and damaged cells and essentially, destroying sick or ailing cells, recycling them, clearing them away so that healing can take place. So these healing and anti-inflammatory pathways and these recycling pathways, they really can't turn on when the cells are busy doing other things. It's like you've got a factory and you're so busy making product that you can't clean up
Mm-hmm.
and repair your machinery at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, when the factory closes or the office closes, the cleaning staff usually come in at night just because you
Yeah.
can't run both. Yeah.
Good analogy.
Um, okay, that makes sense. So for the average person, how how long is it going to take to go into ketosis? Is it going to be like can you talk about that in terms of intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding? What are the time frames and what are some of the, let's say, experiential markers that people might be able to use to get a sense of whether or not they're in ketosis? Does that mean necessarily they're going to feel like they're starving, they're very hungry?
Another great question. How long it takes somebody to get into ketosis varies dramatically depending on a lot of different things. How old you are, how physically active you are, what you ate the previous day, and what medications you're taking, what health issues you may have, how stressed you are, how much sleep you got. All of these different things play a role in your metabolic health and in your metabolic flexibility. And how much glycogen you've got stored in your liver. So if you've carb loaded the night before, let's say you're a marathoner or anything, I got to eat a lot of pasta. Your liver will be absolutely full, stuffed with glycogen or starch, a fast fuel ready to for you to burn. You have to burn a certain amount of that glycogen down before your body will start to turn to fat for energy. So if you've eaten a very high carbohydrate diet the day before, it's going to take you longer. You have to burn through that glycogen. If you're sedentary, it's going to take you longer to burn through that glycogen. You know what I mean? And if you've eaten a lot of carbohydrate and your glucose levels have gone up and stayed up for quite a long time, it's going to take a lot longer for those to come down. And it's going to take that insulin, that extra insulin that you needed to manage all that glucose, it's going to take a lot longer for that to come down into the fat burning range. So if you're really metabolically flexible and healthy and physically fit and all those good things, and you didn't eat a lot of junk the day before, then you might go into ketosis. It could be in 24 hours. It could even be less than that. It might even be as little as 12 hours, depending on the circumstances. But in most cases, it takes people at least a day, to get into ketosis. And then it's more like 2 or 3 days for the average adult. But for some of my patients who have a lot more metabolic damage, it can take a week.
And so would that mean like literally not consuming calories for a week, or does that mean not consuming carbohydrates for a week?
Yeah, great question too. This is great. So there are everything that we eat stimulates a certain amount of insulin response by the body, except pure fat. If you eat pure, which nobody eats pure fat. So if you sit down and fruit a bowl of pure fat, then you're not going to get an insulin response. But we always eat fat mixed with other things. Protein stimulates insulin, carbohydrates stimulate insulin, in most cases even more than protein, and refined carbohydrates stimulate insulin the most. So if you let's see, I lost track of your question.
Oh, I was just asking if it's for some, you said some of your patients it could take several days to go into ketosis. Would that mean literally not eating or
Oh,
just
right.
eating no
Yes.
carbs?
So what you need to do to get into ketosis is you need to bring your insulin levels down to the fat burning point. And it's only when you get your insulin levels down to that fat burning point that fat burning will turn on. And when you're burning fat vigorously enough, then you'll start producing ketones. So because every food, that's where I was going with this, I lost track. Because every food you eat, except pure fat, because every food we eat stimulates insulin to some extent, the fastest way to get into ketosis is to not eat anything at all. It drops insulin like a stone. It's not always the safest or most comfortable thing to do. So I'm not saying that I would recommend that for everybody, because there are certainly people who should not do that. And it's very uncomfortable. It can be, depending on what you're eating when you're not fasting, right? So if you don't eat anything at all, your insulin levels come down the fastest. And again, depending on your metabolic flexibility, whatever, that's going to be the fastest way for you getting into ketosis. But most people, when they're trying to get into ketosis, they are eating, they're not fasting, they're eating something. And what you want to do then, of course, is you want to eat foods that require the least amount of insulin to be processed. So that's going to be fat as the major component of your diet. This is what a ketogenic diet looks like. This is why ketogenic diets are ketogenic, is that they are designed in a way to minimize their impact on insulin. So it's high fat, because fat doesn't require any insulin for processing, moderate, adequate protein, which will stimulate some insulin, but you have to eat protein. So you got to include some protein, and very as little carbohydrate as you can stand, because the carbohydrate's what's going to really stimulate them. And as soon as you get in a bump in insulin, fat burning is going to turn off.
Mm-hmm. And so this is probably counterintuitive for a lot of people. My entire life, people thought, oh, I have to eat a low fat diet because eating fat will make me fat. But essentially what you're telling us is that if you eat something like a ketogenic diet, you're eating mainly fat instead of carbohydrates as your energy source. And this is actually going to prompt your body to burn fat.
Yes. So we are told to eat a low fat. And again, it sounds logical, right? It sounds like, oh my gosh, if I'm trying to lose fat, I don't want to eat fat. But it really, what we're not taught is that it's not the fat that we're eating that's making us fat. It's the high insulin levels. You can't store fat unless your insulin levels are high. And you can't burn fat unless your insulin levels are low.
Mhm.
So you can put yourself into fat burning mode. If you ate pure fat for the next 3 days, you would be in ketosis. And you would be burning fat. Now, you might not be losing weight because if you're eating too much fat, then you're going to be burning the fat that you ate and not the fat that's on your body.
Mhm.
So eating a high fat diet, even if it's ketogenic, doesn't always lead to weight loss. It depends on, and this is where calories do kind of matter. It depends on how much fat you're eating and what your goals are. So, but if you're trying to burn fat, you need to turn fat burning on. So you've got to get the carbohydrate down, so there are three ways to get into ketosis. You can eat a ketogenic diet where the macronutrients are the correct ratio to stimulate that process. You can fast, you can also exercise intensely. If you do that for long enough, you will eventually go into ketosis, or you can eat a very low calorie diet. If you want to eat carbs and get into ketosis, you've got to get your calories down to 725 per day or less. And that's very hard for people to sustain long term. So the only way to safely and comfortably remain in ketosis, if that's your goal, without fasting, without restricting calories, and without exercising, if that's not something you hope not to have to do, although I do recommend everybody exercise, the safest, most comfortable way to do that and stay in ketosis is to eat a ketogenic diet.
Hmm. Metabolic psychiatry. Can you start talking about this and maybe start by what are some examples of how you and your practice have successfully treated some kind of significant, mental issue that someone has had using primarily or exclusively a dietary as opposed to a pharmacological approach?
Yeah, many, many examples in my own work. I've included quite a few examples in the book as well. And I've done research on this, and I helped publish a paper a couple of years ago on this as well. Lots of examples I could give. So I'll give an example from my own practice, and then I'll give an example from the study that we published. So for example, in my own practice, like I said, there are examples in the book, but I'll give an example that's not in the book, just in case people already read the book and want a new example. So there's a woman in her 70s I've been working with for, I think, about 4 years now, at least, chronic, so 40 plus years of recurrent manic episodes, essentially psychiatrically disabled from these recurrent manic episodes, which required hospitalization twice a year, often for several months at a time, and lots of psychiatric medications over the years that helped very little, did not prevent these hospitalizations and these recurrent manic episodes. So she consulted with me. Her daughter actually got in touch with me a few years ago and said, and she was eating a ketogenic diet for her own reasons, for different health reasons. And she had heard about metabolic psychiatry. She said, do you think a ketogenic diet might be able to help my mom with her mental health? And I honestly had no idea whether, especially in a case like this, where someone had, decades long history of serious mental illness of this degree that had been this, quote, treatment resistant. I honestly didn't know what was possible, and I really never know what's possible. So I said, I don't know what's possible, but it's certainly worth a try. And so this lovely woman, she very cheerfully and willingly adopted this ketogenic diet and followed it to the letter. By the end of 2 weeks, um, so many of her, she was no longer paranoid. She was no longer anxious. She was waking up 3 hours earlier, able to be more functional throughout the day. And we were over the course of the next 4 months, her psychiatric medications were able to come down dramatically, including she was able to come completely off one of her antipsychotic medications. She was able to come almost completely off a second very powerful antipsychotic medication, and she was able to come completely off a third medication, which was an antidepressant mood stabilizer. And she continues to follow the diet to this day. We're still working together, and she's still she used to be hospitalized twice a year. pretty much like clockwork for decades. And over the past 4 years, she's been hospitalized only twice. And so this is a wonderful example of it really is never too late, and the situation is almost never too serious to benefit substantially from a ketogenic diet.
So that sounds so she was suffering from manic episodes. She was on antipsychotics and several medications. Um, I, I don't know the details here, but I know that some work has been published recently looking at the ketogenic diet for bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
What's known there, and is this something that we're seeing repeated success with in many people?
Yeah, so there are three studies worth mentioning in this area. All have been published in the really since the summer of 2022. I'm telling this area is really a very rich area of research, tremendous promise, wonderful results from all three of these studies, and the research is exploding in this area, not just in bipolar disorder, but in other serious mental illnesses. So I'll give a quick example, a quick summary of each one of these studies because they're all really important and so exciting. One of them was just published last week. So the first study is a study that I helped to publish. It was a study conducted in Toulouse, France, by my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Denat, psychiatrist in Toulouse, practicing now for more than 35 years. He invited 31 of his most so-called treatment-resistant patients with chronic schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or severe major depression into the hospital as volunteers to try a whole foods, mildly ketogenic diet under his supervision to see if it would help them. These were patients who had been ill for an average of 10 years, some for as long as 30 years. They were taking, at the time of admission, an average of 5 psychiatric medications, almost all of them taking at least one antipsychotic medication, and all of them had at least one marker of poor metabolic health, and none of them were doing well, and he had really run out of ideas for how to help them. They were receiving attentive psychotherapy, medication management. They'd been hospitalized many times before already. In this case, 28 of the 31 patients were able to stay on the diet for longer than 2 weeks, which is what you need to do to start to see results. Every single one of those 28 patients improved and improved substantially. 43% of them achieved clinical remission from their primary psychiatric diagnosis. 64% of them left the hospital on less psychiatric medication. And so, and most of them lost a clinically meaningful amount of weight despite taking these medications, these antipsychotic medications, which are notorious for causing substantial and
Yeah.
very stubborn weight gain.
Okay, so they lost weight despite weight gain being a side effect of many of those medications. You said it was a
Yes.
mildly ketogenic diet. What exactly does mild mean?
Yeah, so there are different degrees. There are different degrees of ketogenic diets. There are sort of relaxed ketogenic diets where the carbohydrates are restricted, but you might not restrict protein to the same degree. You might not restrict the amount of calories that are coming in, right? So
Mhm.
it's kind of a more relaxed diet. It's not designed to get
But
ketones
it's still
very high.
ultra low carbohydrate.
Yes, in this case, it was 20 grams of carbohydrate or less per day.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a ceiling placed on protein, but when I say mildly ketogenic diet, what I mean is that when these patients were tested by urine testing, which is what they had available in this particular clinic, they were just a low level of ketones on
Mhm.
the strips. So there are also very strict ketogenic diets, which were originally developed back in 1921 for the treatment of pediatric epilepsy. These were very deeply ketogenic diets where ketone levels were very, very high. And the diets had to be not just restricted in carbohydrate, but also restricted in protein in order to get the ketone levels up to those very high levels. So this was a mildly ketogenic diet, meaning it wasn't hard to follow. It didn't require protein restriction, it was a fairly liberal
Mhm.
ketogenic diet, but still keto.
And this French study that you mentioned, it was a mixed population, and you said it included people with schizophrenia.
Yes. Mhm.
So even something like schizophrenia, which we often think of as one of the more severe mental health issues someone can have, people are seeing significant results with that.
Yes, absolutely. And so in this group of people, not only did they improve, did their psychotic symptoms improve, but they improved substantially. The degree of benefit that people experienced with this ketogenic diet in terms of their psychotic symptoms was 7 times more benefit, more improvement in their symptoms than we see in studies of antipsychotic medications.
How are you starting to think about the why here? Why would such a wide range of psychiatric illnesses respond to going into this ketogenic metabolic regime?
Yeah, and I think this really speaks to the power and the promise of ketogenic diets for all kinds of health conditions, brain as well as bodily health conditions. It is because when we're in a state of ketosis, um, lots of different pathways and lots of different operations in the brain work better. Ketones burn more cleanly, more efficiently, with less inflammation and less oxidative stress. And when you're not eating high sugar, high insulin, high vegetable oil diet, when you're not eating all these damaging, destabilizing ingredients, which damage the brain from the inside out, when you quiet all that down, you focus on whole foods, you get your glucose levels down, you get your insulin levels down, everything can quiet down and you can kind of restore peace to the village, so to speak. The whole brain works better when it's not in this high glucose, high vegetable oil, high insulin state most of the time. So of course it makes sense to consider this intervention almost regardless of the diagnosis. I mean, I think really the only diagnosis I might caution people against using this or considering using this intervention with is underweight anorexia. Just really, we've seen benefits in our clinical experience and in published case reports and in some of these early trials in just about every psychiatric condition that's been looked at so far.
So, the ketogenic diet, very interesting, often very difficult to maintain. Let's assume someone's listening and they don't think or they're not willing to try to permanently stay on a ketogenic diet. Do you what are some of your recommendations or guidelines there? Like, do you think people should be trying to go into ketosis once or twice a week through intermittent fasting? How do you think about ketosis for people that don't want to stay permanently on a ketogenic diet?
Okay, great. So one of my goals in the book, I didn't want the book just to be about ketogenic diets because for so many people, even just the word ketogenic is a non-starter, right? There are some people who will not consider this, don't want to try it, and I understand that. And not everybody needs to. Not everybody needs to follow a ketogenic diet to reap multiple brain health benefits through dietary changes. There are lots of other changes you can make to your diet that don't require going into ketosis that can improve brain health. For example, just taking the refined carbohydrates and vegetable oils and all the ultra-processed foods out of the diet, which all of us should do anyway, it's a huge step in the right direction. And for some people, just following these whole foods principles is all they need to do to quiet things down and recover. However, if that's not useful enough to you, you may need to start to explore other changes. You might need to cut back on the amount of carbohydrate in your diet. You may even need to go to a ketogenic level of carbohydrate restriction. Everybody's different in terms of their metabolic health. So in the book, I've got different levels of dietary strategies that people can try. And the first one is it's a paleo diet that has 90 grams of carbohydrate per day in it. So it allows you to have a serving of, starch or fruit or whatever you like.
What's the average American at right now in terms of grams per day?
Over 300.
Over 300. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So 90 grams a day on this one. And
Yep. So it's a paleo diet, but it's got a lower carbohydrate than where a standard paleo diet, say like the Whole30, which is a wonderful diet. A standard paleo diet or hunter-gatherer diet puts no ceiling on anything. So you can have as much of those whole foods, meats and poultry and eggs and fish and nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables. You can have as much of those foods, you just eat to satiety. Now, the reason why I recommend 90 grams of carbohydrate is because most of us do now have some degree of insulin resistance,
Hmm.
meaning that's our ability to safely process large amounts of carbohydrate is somewhat impaired.
Hmm.
And so if you don't cut back on that, you may not see the same good results. So I recommend this, moderate carbohydrate paleo diet as step one. If that doesn't help enough, then you can explore, if you wish, lowering the carbohydrate even further, even down into the ketogenic range, which is step two. And then there's even a third option for people who don't get enough benefit from those two strategies or have a lot of unexplained or chronic health issues, autoimmune conditions, gut sensitivities, food sensitivities, gut health issues. For people who really are struggling with a lot of mysterious health conditions or stubborn health conditions, they may even want to explore, at least temporarily, carnivore, plant-free, a carnivore diet, at least for a short period of time. So there are these different levels of engagement with dietary strategies that people can explore. And another thing I would say to people who say, well, oh my gosh, I could never be on a ketogenic diet for the rest of my life. I never, 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 with any patient say, we're going to do this for the rest of your life.
Hmm. Hmm.
What I say is, I would encourage you to try it for 6 to 12 weeks to see what it feels like, and then decide whether or not you want to continue on it a little longer. Because if you've never tried it, it can be a really eye-opening experience. It's a completely different state of mind. Often people don't recognize their own feelings, their own thoughts, their own behaviors when they're in that different state of that different metabolic state. So I think everybody deserves to experience that and then decide what they'd like to do longer term.
So, for your recommendation around the carnivore diet, it's pretty generic recommendation. People are just sort of generally feeling like a little off or whatever. You can sometimes recommend that to them. How much of that diet is is the benefit coming from the carnivore per se, or is it coming from the elimination of all of the other unknowns?
It's probably both.
Hmm.
It's really anybody's guess. But I do think that it's both because I personally and have a lot of clinical experience with this as well, using different dietary strategies within the same individual, sort of graduating people through these different steps. And it's interesting, a lot of people might say, well, maybe the benefit to the carnivore diet is just that it has zero carbohydrate in it. So maybe it's just like ultra ketogenic, right? So
Mm.
it's because it's not just low carb, it's no carb. That must be the magic to it. But the interesting thing is that there have been quite a few people, including myself, who have spent a long time on a very low plant ketogenic diet. Good ketones for long periods of time, experienced lots of benefits. And then we switch to a plant-free carnivore diet. The ketones may or may not be higher. Sometimes they're actually lower. And there are there are significant additional benefits to that diet, even if the ketones are not as high. There's something else happening with a plant-free diet that seems to go beyond the metabolic piece to perhaps the nutritional piece and the elimination of toxins and anti-nutrients and so forth.
And is that when you say that, is that based on like patients telling you they feel better? Is it based on like lower inflammatory markers that you measure? Where's that coming from?
Yeah, so in my clinical work, it's coming obviously from people's reported experiences and my sort of experience with them. There's no formal research yet of any rigor in terms of controlled trials or even small clinical trials, prospective clinical trials um, on carnivore diets yet. They are coming, but we don't have these yet. So right now we just get lots and lots of people experimenting with their diet and experiencing these benefits and reporting them. We do have some nicely documented case reports in the literature, and I've included some of those in the book, showing that there have been some people who have really, experienced remarkable healing and recovery from even some very serious autoimmune conditions on carnivore diets, tremendous benefits in certain types of cancer, autoimmune conditions like type 1 diabetes. It really can be pretty remarkable. These are isolated cases.
Mhm.
And so we do need more research in this area. There was, in fact, just a fascinating paper three very well documented cases of people who had suffered with severe anorexia, with a BMI, normal BMI, that's a measure of body size, BMI down as low as below 11, whereas a normal BMI would be 19 or higher. So very, very seriously, gravely ill, who fully recovered, all three of them independently, fully recovered from severe anorexia, life-threatening anorexia, on a plant-free carnivore diet, and have remained in remission. Each have gained more than 40 pounds each, and sustained remission for 1 to 5 years now and counting. So there are some, this diet is one of those diets that has some interesting properties that we don't yet fully understand.
And so, based on everything that you've seen with the carnivore diet, and I know there's many people have tried this at this point. So there's lots and lots of anecdotes out there. Many different physicians like you have directly seen what people have done with this diet. How do you get all of your vitamins and minerals? Do you need to supplement, or can you get basically everything you need from whole foods on a carnivore diet?
It's an area of controversy. So I've included information. I've addressed this in the book. There's a whole chapter about carnivore diets in the book, and addresses this question. So a fascinating difference between plants and animals that a lot of people may not know is that it is absolutely 100% impossible to get all of your nutrients from plants, because there are certain nutrients that plants simply do not contain that are essential for humans. It is theoretically possible to obtain all of your nutrients from animal foods. It is theoretically possible. Is it in real life possible? Are there actual risks? Are we getting enough of them? If you eat the right mix of animal foods, and what is the right mix of animal foods? How much of these nutrients do we actually need? All of these questions are being explored, but theoretically, it is possible. You can find all the nutrients you need in animal foods. The question is, how much of them do we need, and are we getting enough? And does it matter what the mix of animal foods is?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it sounds like based on everything that you've told me, you would recommend anyone, whether they're metabolically healthy, whether they have a mental illness, whether they're just an average person, that you would probably recommend minimizing refined grains and vegetable oils.
I would recommend removing them to the extent that you possibly can, as much as as humanly possible.
Can you reiterate a little bit on why that is? I know that we've already covered it, but it can't hurt to reiterate it. And then talk about that in the context of, that more or less directly disagrees with what the official dietary guidelines would say, right? Get a lot of whole grains, get a lot of this stuff. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so all of those recommendations, the recommendation there's so many nutrition myths which stand in the way of your good physical and mental health. And one of them is that we need whole grains at all. Not just that, and they're not just unhealthy for you. We don't need them at all. And so we don't need them, and they're actually working against you. And the reason why we hear all the time that whole grains are healthy for us is that the studies that demonstrate this are comparing diets that contain whole grains to diets that contain refined grains. Now, of course, whole grains are going to win every single time in that fight. We're not comparing diets that contain whole grains to diets that don't contain any grain at all. So we're not asking the question. We're not asking the right question, right? So whole grains, when you actually look at what they are, if we stand back and dispassionately, objectively explore what's actually in them, they have almost none of the nutrients that we need, and they're loaded with anti-nutrients and toxins, and they're very difficult to digest, and they're toxic unless you cook them and process them to a certain degree. You will get very sick if you eat whole grains as is. So many red flags there. So I recommend that everybody, for best health, and I've got this little diagram in the book that kind of shows you how you want to build your diet for optimal health. You want the core of your diet to be non-dairy animal foods. How much of those you eat, is an open question. I make some recommendations, but the core, you do need to include at least some non-dairy animal foods in your diet to meet all of your nutrient requirements. And then the next layer of the diet are the fruits and vegetables that you tolerate, meaning the ones that don't bother you, that you digest easily, and that don't exceed your personal carbohydrate threshold. And then, and going beyond that, the further out you go, the less nutritious and more risky you get.
Mhm.
So yes, that's what I recommend.
Non-starchy vegetables, what are some of the ones in your experience that are the least problematic in general?
Yeah, so the least problematic are the non-nightshade fruit vegetables. So these are vegetables that are these are fruits in disguise. So these are vegetables that contain seeds. So cucumbers, for example, it's a good example. So these are low sugar, low starch. We call them vegetables, but they're actually fruits because they contain seeds. These are olives, cucumbers, zucchini, things like that. The non-nightshades, because there are some nightshade fruit vegetables, peppers and tomatoes. They contain seeds, but they're also nightshades. So I do warn people to at least consider that they may be working against them if they have a mental health issue, at least worth exploring. So because the plant, especially if the plant needs you to help you disperse its seeds, is going to put many fewer toxins in that part of its body because it doesn't want to poison its transport system.
Mhm.
So the fruits of plants are often, but not always, the least toxic part of the plant. And the seeds, the grains, beans, nuts, and seeds of the plant, those are often, but not always, the most toxic and heavily defended parts of the plant.
Hmm. How, we don't have that much time left, but I want to ask you, like, where do you think this metabolic psychiatry thing is going to go? How do you think we should be looking to use diet as much as we possibly can to treat psychiatric illness and as a way to get people off all of the different medications they're often on? Do you think we're over relying on the drugs?
Absolutely. It just doesn't make sense that 1 in 5 Americans would need psychiatric medication to function. This doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense that, 1 in 4 adults have a psychiatric condition so significant that it interferes with their ability to function, and that among young adults ages 18 to 25, it's now 1 in 3. Something is terribly wrong. Our brains were not designed to malfunction on this grand scale. If we eat a species appropriate diet and protect ourselves from toxic substances in the environment to the extent that we can, our brains should work well and serve us well for our entire lives. That's not what's happening. We now expect our brains to fall apart as we get older. We expect ourselves to crumble under stress and never recover. We expect ourselves not to be resilient, not to embrace challenges. We expect ourselves to need lots and lots of support and extra help to get through the day. I mean, this is not, of course, that's not robust mental health. And that's not our birthright. I mean, if you feed the brain properly from day one, from conception, there's a whole chapter about that. If you feed the brain properly from day one, it should serve you well.
And can you say for people explicitly what's the title of the book and what, this is not this, it's a book about diet, it's about metabolism, but it's not a diet book in the sense that you're pushing one diet, right?
Right. I mean, really what I've tried to do, so this is the book, it's called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. And it's a book that the goal is really to do two things here. So one thing is to help people with who are worried about their mental health, which is now just about all of us, whether you've got a condition right now or you're worried about a future condition like Alzheimer's, or there's someone you love has a mental health condition. It's designed to help you understand that changing your diet can be a really powerful intervention, therapeutic intervention for mental health. It can help you in ways no medicine can, but you have to know which dietary changes are the ones that are worth making, and they're not the ones that you've heard about. They're not the ones you're being told. Sprinkling more blueberries on your oatmeal is not a useful strategy. It doesn't work. And, following a Mediterranean diet is healthier than the standard American diet. And study after study has shown this, but it doesn't go far enough. The Mediterranean diet is a little healthier than the standard. It discourages certain type, it discourages some processed foods. It asks you to remove some refined carbohydrates, but but explicitly encourage you to include others, it sends a lot of mixed messages. Alcohol is okay. Red wine is good for you. You're supposed to eat bread and pasta and cereal as the basis of your diet, even if you have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. You're supposed to base your diet on the least nutritious foods we have, and put the most nutritious foods at the very tip of the triangle. It doesn't make any sense. So the Mediterranean diet, if you want real change to your mental health, you can't just nibble around the edges of the standard American diet, which is what the Mediterranean diet does. And you can't just sprinkle superfoods on top and hope that the base of your diet is that you'll be saved. If you want real change to your mental health, meaningful within days to weeks improvement in your mental health, you have to make real change to your diet, fundamentally restructure your diet in ways that make biological sense from the ground up, not based on wild guesses and theories and dogma and dietary ideology. You want to base your diet not on ideology and mythology, but biology. And when you do that, you will, in most cases, I know it doesn't solve every problem, in most cases, you'll experience tremendous benefits. So the book is designed to help you understand that and give you hope, but it's also designed to give you, like you said, it's not really a diet book. It walks you through all the different foods that you are curious about, explains the pros and cons, the risks and benefits of each one so that you can decide for yourself what you want to eat, and make your own informed choices. You're an adult, you're grown up, you can make your own choices. I don't really want to tell you what to eat, but I want you to have the right information so that if you're trying to optimize your mental health, you actually have the tools that you need to do it.
All right, I think that's a great place to end it. Yeah, I've got about halfway through the book right now. I definitely recommend it to people. I think it's a great resource, especially if you're just starting to learn about some of this stuff. And you don't need a heavy science background to understand it. So Dr. Georgia Eid, thank you for your time.
Thank you very, very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for your great questions and the great discussion.